Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another engaging episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose, the Power of Values. I am excited to have Eric Schneider joining us today. Eric, thanks for joining us.
It is a pleasure to be here, Michael.
You know it is. I think the pleasure's all mine, but hopefully you feel the same way for it. So, and y'all can express the love too by showing a little pleasure and appreciation. Make sure to like the podcast that you're listening to, whether it's on Spotify or you're over there on Apple, or now that you might even catch us on YouTube. And importantly, make sure to click the subscribe button. And then, of course, you're going to hear some phenomenal insights and learnings from Eric's career to date. And you'll probably have some comments as well. So with that, Eric, people want to know, were you born this way, or how did you get into the valuation and appraisal profession?
It's a hard question for me because I was born into it.
Oh, wow.
And I hate saying that because I never worked with my parents, who were both residential real estate appraisers, but it definitely gave me a leg up to know what I need to do to get licensed. Yeah. I knew that the profession existed. I know a lot of people around the universe don't even know what we do for a living, but having that exposure at a young age, going out with my folks to go shoot comps and do all that jazz got the wheels turning and helped me get a start to my career.
So you were practically a semi-pro photographer before you ever got to the industry, is what you're telling us.
That's exactly it. I could read Thomas guides. I could shoot photos. I could tell my folks what exit they got off of wrong and all things. And obviously, I definitely use all those skills today.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. Wow, that's amazing. So you, like so many people, had the opportunity just to learn from your parents, because, when you're a young person, that's kind of how it goes, whether it was just being around them or meals or what have you. And what was your experience of it as a child or a young adult with your parents, like doing this thing called residential real estate appraisal?
It was interesting because it gave me exposure on things that I liked and things that I thought, I would want to improve on that.
Okay.
Going out, being in the field every day, talking to buyers and sellers, calling brokers, real estate agents, that all seemed very interesting. Yeah. And as I got older, graduated high school and thought, man, what am I going to do with my life? Didn't want to get into sales because I'm not a salesy guy. At least that's what I told myself years ago. Houses were cool, but commercial buildings had a more special place in my heart. So It gave me a chance to think about where I wanted to go. And having that direction, you're told you can go two different paths, right? You can go the residential route or the commercial route.
Yes.
No one told you that you can also do both. At least that was the case for me.
Surprise!
Surprise, exactly. But it gave me direction, and I certainly needed that as a young man with the world in front of him and trying to figure out where to go.
Wow, that is quite an experience. The environment of growing up with parents that were in residential real estate, were you fortunate enough to have? Well, I don't know. Were your parents independent, or did they have work together? They worked for separate firms? Maybe share a little.
Mom worked for, can't even tell you how many iterations of banks ago that she was a part of, but it was long enough that there was a company car that she could drive around in. So that was cool. So it was interesting because you got to see both aspects of it. Someone trying to hang their shingle and build a business for themselves, and the other having a bank opportunity, which provided a steady workflow and a steady lifestyle growing up.
Yeah, I like that. Well, that's fantastic. So when did you actually make the decision that you weren't going to pursue some other route? And like, did you go to college with the intention of studying like economics, real estate, finance, or were you like, I'm going to go be a microbiologist?
If I wanted to be a microbiologist, that would be a interesting life at this point.
Sure.
But I knew real estate was the field I wanted to pursue. And knowing that appraisal existed, it was still a little bit on the periphery in terms of where I wanted to end up. I went to college with the intent to graduate with a degree in real estate. I ended up going to San Diego State, graduating with a degree in business administration with a real estate emphasis.
Oh, nice.
Real estate sales license during the process. I know I just said I didn't want to be a salesperson, but I thought you had to have the license in order to be taken seriously.
Yep.
Had my appraiser trainee license that I got during college, which I thought, I never used it until I graduated, but another conversation starter. It wasn't until I went to my first college real estate club meeting, and I want to give a shout out to the Real Estate Society of San Diego State, because that really changed my life in terms of the people that I've met, the career paths that I now knew were available. The very first speaker at that club meeting that I went to was a commercial real estate appraiser who is still my mentor to this day.
That's amazing.
It is. It's incredible that person was there. We were able to meet, that person was just so generous with their time. Dana Kuhn, like I said, still keep in touch with them to this day.
Yeah.
It seems like in our profession, everyone came from somewhere, and most everyone that I've talked to wants to help bring up the next generation. That doesn't mean that it's easy. It's certainly a challenge to not only break into the profession, but stay there and move up. But there are good people that are able to do it and donate their time in doing so. And that just gave me a path. That mentor would take me to Appraisal Institute meetings. He told me to get involved with CoStar Group, which I'm sure all the listeners know and love and pay for. They happen to have an office in San Diego where I'm based, and gave me a chance to work there during college.
So you actually worked there during college? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was, again, just that some things line up, and if you're there, you get to take advantage of it. I was told to try to get an internship, but they had a full-time position available. And for some reason, they decided to hire a kid in college to work there full-time. And so the experience I got researching sales and leases, sometimes people are a little timid calling brokers and buyers and sellers. I got over that real quick.
Sure. Imagine so. And that's
so many calls a day.
Yep.
It definitely laid the foundation for what I do today, which is talk to people and be an investigator and look at all the transactions that occur in a particular market. Yeah, it was awesome to be a part of that.
Eric, do I infer that you were going to school and working full time?
You would be correct. Those were very long days.
Yeah. I understand. I worked 3 jobs going through school, so it would have been nice to have one employer. I kind of appreciating what you had, no matter who your employer was.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those lessons that was instilled to me when I was young, which is there are some sacrifices that you have to make in order to get where you want to go. And yeah, it was hard, but it was a good kind of hard, and you get to choose what hard you want to have. So I was tired at the end of the day. I probably focused more on work than school, but I was also able to pay for school with that work. So
that's huge.
Ultimately, it worked out.
How did the conversation? I don't know. Did you live at home and go to school, or did you live on campus?
A little bit of both. Yeah, was able to get an apartment later on in Pacific Beach, which, for those familiar with San Diego, PB is not a college. Yeah, I'll just leave it
not
at
a
that.
bad place to live. So the reason why I asked was if you were, it sounds like you did have time around your parents. How did those conversations go where compared to what they were doing, you were also in the larger industry called real estate, but wow, you're coming at it from a whole different perspective, getting that opportunity to be a researcher and having a full-time role at, a large data aggregator. And they're in the field doing the actual work.
They were proud. They were proud that I was paying off my student loans by myself. That was pretty cool.
Nice.
But it's just a different realm for them. And I realized that, we can still have conversations about real estate and appraisal at the dinner table, but there was a divergence in that, the things that you look for when you're appraising commercial real estate, it's different. It's different than residential. And there are certainly specialists in each of those realms, and some of the methodology can transfer over to each other. But it was getting to a point where, they were happy with what I was doing, but they were going to stay in their lane and I was going to stay in mine.
Well, that makes sense. And you shared that you had this exposure and experience growing up. You were already a semi-professional photographer by then. I mean, you wanted to get out and use those skills.
Yeah, certainly. And it was nice because, again, at CoStar, I was able to learn that side of the business that I wasn't exposed to being younger, growing up. And then the next step was, all right, I know how to talk to a broker, know what questions to ask. And once I graduated college and got that piece of paper, then trying to go out and get that next appraisal opportunity.
That's amazing. So you graduate. I mean, clearly at this point, you're doing research. Was there ever any doubt for you that you were going to stay in that real estate lane? I mean, you had your sales license. I heard you mention you're doing research and you end up going into appraisal, but was there ever any other considerations?
Nope. It was pretty clear. My thought was this. I spent a lot of time working on one thing, and another mentor I had growing up said, you have to spend time in that one thing in order to make an impact.
Yeah.
A lot of folks have this shiny object syndrome where they're bouncing around from venture to venture or opportunity to opportunity. And, a lot of my success relative to others has been just me focusing on one thing for a very long time and putting in that work. When I figured out that I needed to stay in a place for a while, that was it. I decided not to go all in on any sales route.
Yep.
And do the appraisal thing.
I commend you for that, Eric. I think there continues to be a subset of the population that understands and makes that investment. I hope it grows, although I'd say the trends of recent years indicate to the contrary. But what a difference it makes, as you said, to continually focus on one thing to better yourself and improve your skills and abilities as a way ultimately to serve others and to solve problems. That's amazing. So you graduate and you go into commercial appraising, I assume, since you had been working at CoStar.
You'd like to think so, Michael. Well, first of all, I graduated in late 2008, early 2009. Which
what a wonderful time to graduate,
wasn't it? Though
it was special.
Yeah, especially being in real estate, being in the appraisal field.
Wow,
everything was falling apart, and I thought, well, this is the perfect time to get out of school. And it was really difficult to get that next appraisal or, get a valuation opportunity, let alone commercial, residential, what have you.
Sure.
This was back in the day when there were monthly appraisal institute meetings, not so much anymore. At least we're where I'm based.
Okay.
But I remember going to meetings month after month after month, talking to people, getting business cards, saying, hey, I have all this experience except for that one valuation part. And ultimately, I ended up working for an appraiser who lived about an hour away from where I was, who was looking for someone to help with his particular niche, which was wildfire valuation.
Ooh, fascinating.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Just out of ignorance. I'm from Louisville, but I live in Chicago. Wildfires. We might have a building fire, but what's a wildfire? What does that mean in terms of valuation and appraisal?
Well, it's an environmentally based situation where, for some reason, something catches fire and ends up devastating a particular area. About 15 years ago, it was alleged that a local utility company power line was impacted by strong winds and sparked and ended up causing a lot of destruction in my particular region. And when that happens, then someone needs to know, all right, what's that house that was impacted worth before and after the fire? What's that ranch property worth? And so I was hired to help manage all of the properties that were burned in this particular area. There was hundreds of them.
What? Fascinating.
Yeah. And that was really only the opportunity that was available at the time. That the lending market, kind of familiar to today, was not very active. And this was an opportunity to get my foot in the door and say that I was in real estate appraisal. That came with its own challenges. Again, there was a commute to get to where I needed to go, but
heavy commute too.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. Yep. And challenges with learning anything new. I got a degree in real estate, but appraising is its own set of educational and learning and experience requirements, which included, all right, I graduated school. Now I got to go back to school and take Appraisal Institute classes.
Yeah,
I'm sure everyone has that frustration where you're just going back to learn. But again, going back to my earlier comment, you choose your heart, and I thought, well, I'm in it now. I have to prove myself and just try to rise above those challenges. And it was a good opportunity. It was a stepping stone to where I needed to go, and I happily took it.
That's amazing. It's, again, exposure, experience, truly enlightenment. The opportunity to experience something that other people maybe only read about, much less ever be in the midst of. Would you call yourself like a project manager? Was that kind of the role you had? Was it more research oriented? Were you pulling out your professional photography skills? Like, what's going on? That opportunity as a research.
A little bit of everything.
Okay.
At one point in the beginning, we just didn't know what we had. There were so many properties. And so just getting a grasp of what was impacted, the property type, the characteristics of each property, it was pretty monumental, and that not even our clients knew what exactly they had going on. So it was a lot of database management, project management, education to the client about what the issues were, what the properties were. I was only there for a couple of years, but during those couple of years, it was a lot of that, a lot of research. And towards the tail end of my time there, actually getting to appraise some of those things. That was more towards the end of it.
Well, the important thing was you secured employment during one of the worst times of the industry. That was quite a tumultuous time for many that sent a lot of people out of the profession. It hurt a lot of people in a material way that maybe they never came back from. And nonetheless, you were able to take some shelter and get some education along the way. And then you mentioned you were there for a little bit of time. What was your next opportunity after? I mean, maybe you just got tired of smelling like fire. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a unique.
Well, we went back to my original charge, which was the commercial aspect of it was something that was appealing to me and still was at the time. And
yes,
there was an opportunity to work for a commercial shop in San Diego. It was in an Integra office where one of the principal's daughter happened to work at CoStar at the time that I was there. And so talk about a relationship business, right? Where like, hey,
no kidding.
It's 2011. Things are still not too fantastic in terms of the hiring market. I was able to get interviewed, had experience and the CoStar training and everything else, and was able to get a job with Integra for a number of years, learning the commercial side finally.
Obviously, a lot of us around commercial are familiar with the Integra name, but we have a number of listeners that are maybe more like your mom and dad who are residential in experience. Share a little bit about what it was like working at Integra in the approach to work and assignment flow and being on a team or group or specialization or lack of that. Just share a little perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Integra Realty Resources, IRR, is a appraisal company that has several franchises or independent offices around the country. And our charge, or their charge, is to appraise commercial property for their particular market. You know, they kind of stay in their region. They become an expert at it, or at least they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And I've worked on a variety of property types for a variety of situations, mostly lending based, but certainly a lot of trust and estate work. The principal at the time was a big hotel expert, so I learned a lot of hospitality valuation methodologies, which was interesting. But this is a generalist. Commercial was kind of my lane that I was in. And when you're at a shop like that, you're a production person, you're burning the midnight oil, getting appraisals done, and there's not really a team-based aspect to that unless there's a large portfolio of properties and maybe you're working with your other teammates. But mostly it allows you to be independent, and as long as you get your work done, then there's really no issues that follow that.
That's pretty amazing. And then for you, being associated with this type of office in, one of the stronger MSAs in the country, you mentioned the broader property types that you worked on. Were you having to travel a lot, or was it more you were on the research side of the appraisal process?
There was a fair amount of traveling. We're out in the field all the time looking at property, but when I think of travel, I think of going outside of your market, and it was almost all of it was local.
Okay.
Yeah. And Southern California is the kind of region where local could be going up to LA or up to the Inland Empire, but mostly in San Diego is where I did my work.
And Eric, for those that have not been blessed with the golden west coast of the United States, how far is it to go from San Diego up to the Inland Empire or up to East LA?
Well, I was
just so they get some sense, because you look at the map, you don't really understand how far that is till you have to get the car and do it.
That's true. And I know for a lot of folks, people actually measure distance in miles, but we always tend to measure distance in time. It's about an hour.
California.
An hour from San Diego to Inland Empire. In a perfect world, it would be 2 hours to LA, because you have to go through Orange County or the Inland Empire. But it is rarely perfect. We live in an imperfect world. So just make sure you're not up in LA during rush hour.
So you're basically spending a full day when you got an LA assignment.
Yeah, fair.
That's what you're saying.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Well, as you are getting more and more exposure across property types, and you mentioned obviously getting exposure to hospitality, did you find that you liked the generalist approach, or were you naturally gravitating towards certain property types or assignment types?
the assignment type was where I was starting to feel that itch. And I was getting exposed to lots of different reasons why people need appraisals. And the litigation and particularly eminent domain aspect of the appraisal world was something that I learned about through my career. The first person I worked with did eminent domain work, some of it. And as I started to think about, all right, I'm a few years in now, where do I want to go? And what are my peers doing? What are my peers that have been doing this for a long time doing? And who are the ones that are getting the most satisfaction from their work? And it got to a point where I needed to decide, all right, do I stay in my lane here? Do I stay a production person, move up to management, try to buy a franchise somewhere? Do I shift gears and focus on a particular appraisal arena? And after a lot of soul searching, I decided, the litigation route, the chance to testify, the chance to work on complex issues was something that I wanted to explore. I was nearing my ceiling at where I was at, and then it was time to decide how I was going to make that next leap.
So along the way, because of your background, obviously with your family experience, plus where you've worked up to this point, how did you approach education and investment in your own knowledge? Was it because of just who you worked with, or did you also start to take some time and efforts? I mean, because these days, if people don't know you, I think you have more letters after your name than you do in your name. So just kind of give us a sense of how that started to come into existence, because that's a conversation that a lot of people at least consider, and some people actually have throughout the course of their career. And as a very talented and I would say younger professional in this established industry, that shares a lot of perspective and insight that maybe helps some of our listeners take informed action.
The market right now is tough for appraisal companies. Many companies are having a hard time getting enough work with the same marketing they used to. Is your company struggling, having a hard time getting new customers, or getting additional work from existing customers? The answer to this problem is easier than you think. Do more business with the people you already know. Over 10 years, the average U.S. appraisal firm meets over 17,000 potential customers. That's a lot of people you could be doing business with right now. But it's a big problem if you don't have a proven process to communicate with them. Storylux turns this problem into an opportunity to grow. Our advanced AI marketing tool can rebuild your contact lists and harvest long-forgotten communications. Imagine reaching out to everyone you've ever met with just one click. For the cost of 1 or 2 appraisals a month, Storylux helps you reconnect and market to people who already know you, like you, trust you, and want to do business with you. Act now by contacting Storylux today to turn your business growth dreams into reality. Email appraisal@storylux.com. That is appraisal at STORYLUX.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode.
Certainly. I was told early on that you need to get your MAI. And our profession and our members in the Appraisal Institute do a fantastic job of beating that into your brain. and so at the onset, it was, all right, you're going to take these classes and you're going to get state certified, and then you're going to take your advanced education and you're going to get your MAI. And I looked around and I saw that the people running the shops around the country, the people that I have the utmost respect for, have that designation. And it was just something where I said to myself, all right, I need to go do it. And I need to go and do it as fast as I can. So it took me about 5 years from when I started to when I got my MAI.
Nice.
And I worked my tail off to try to get that. And I know I'm not the fastest person to have done it, There are rock stars around the country that certainly did less, but I knew that there were certain milestones that were tangible and I could see. And, obviously getting your state certification sets you apart from others. MAI certainly opens the door to opportunities. And from there, it's all right, what else do I need to learn? What else do I need to achieve to help me get where I need to go? Mm-hmm. When I left Integra and I went to a boutique litigation firm in San Diego, Jones, Roach and Carangella, who I'm sure everyone knows, or many of the listeners know.
Many.
They do a lot of residential work. They do a lot of forensic review work. And so getting those, getting the SRA, getting the AIGRS designations from the Appraisal Institute was something that was important, not only for them, but for me.
Yeah.
As I started to get more right-of-way experience, taking the classes through the International Right-of-Way Association and getting their appraisal certificate was something that was important. Taking the litigation classes through the Appraisal Institute.
Yeah.
I was told early on by Steve Roach that it is really important to be academic and learn why we do what we do, because it's one thing to take income and capitalize it into value, but what income are you capitalizing? What are those inputs?
Steve question.
Why are they so important? Being able to explain what capitalization is.
Mm-hmm.
It may get to a point sometimes where it's us being on autopilot. Yeah, we do this and do this, but particularly in the litigation realm, you have to explain why you're doing what you're doing, and it's helpful to just constantly be learning, continually be learning, asking questions, and it just makes you better at what you do. And to your earlier point, Michael, be able to provide a level of service to your clients because you know the answers to the questions that they're asking.
That's a huge one. You mentioned two things. Again, I do know a portion of our listeners, thousands and thousands of listeners, they're not commercial. So you mentioned one thing a little earlier and a second one just now. Could you just, real high level, what is eminent domain? And then second, you mentioned right away. Could you just quick snippet?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Appreciate the question. Eminent domain is the right to take private property for public use. And when you do that, a public agency has to pay what's called just compensation, which over time has formed into market value. However, market value is defined in that particular area. So I'm, for example, taking some land for a freeway widening or a rail project. There's an appraisal that's usually involved to determine what the value of those rights being taken are. And right of way is those particular infrastructure projects. A lot of my work these days is for grade separation crossings over existing rail lines.
Interesting.
It's easement valuation. Not even valuing land, it's just the right to use that land. What's that right worth?
Sure.
Things like that.
So what, coming out of a firm like Integra, going to work for Jones, Roach, and Carangella, what did you get exposure to that you were both looking for and didn't expect? Because I think that's a helpful thing that people may not be aware of as they move from a larger firm to a smaller firm, but not necessarily small in impact.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is night and day where I came from and where I went. Yes. Every appraisal business model can be different.
Yes.
Where in a larger shop that's national, you tend to focus on lending work, institutional work, quarterly updates for very large clients. Firm that I ended up working for, which again, it's kind of a unique situation in itself, but working around the country on litigation matters where it's more than just, what's the value of property. It's what's the value of a component of a property. What's the value of property right? What does the law say what value is? It's all these different questions that I had no exposure to working in my previous aspects of my career. And now I got to have the fire hydrant approach, where you're just getting all this information, all this exposure, and it was such a rewarding experience to get to be a part of all that and learn what I learned.
And given all these things you learned early on, what was one of the more interesting cases you were exposed to? Because I think that's really what piques people's interest. Because it's nice to talk about like the around it. It's another to like dive into the pool and you're like, and I felt the water all over me and I froze. Yeah. And I jumped right back.
Yeah.
Or I stayed in and learned how to.
It's interesting, Michael, because a lot of these things that we work on, particularly the firm that I was at, I wish I could just talk about, but I can only talk about it or talk around it because all this is just so sensitive. But I will say that
Eric, real quick, for everybody's benefit, and I know you're not being evasive, and I actually respect your answer. Can you share a little bit about the nature of the work that you do and why a lot of it can't be discussed or can't be discussed in great specificity?
Sure. Part of the answer is some of these cases are still ongoing. I will say that the interesting thing about litigation work is the cases can sometimes take years, literally years, for things to...
Years? I thought assignments were due in a week. Eric, what are you talking about?
Days.
Years.
Correct, yeah. That was one of the big changes, actually, moving to a firm that specializes in that, because the projects can take a very long time. And so file management, note management, inspection management, all those types of things where that the timeline is long, you just have to be on top of it. And that was a big change going from one aspect to another. And so, some of these cases are still ongoing. So for me to talk about it is probably not in anybody's best interest. But, the cases that I was involved in involved governments at the local level all the way up to the federal level. It involved properties from one side of the coast to the other. It's a situation where the facts of the matter can be really sensitive and the issues can be really complex. So you have to hire the people or get the right team in place to help understand what the issues are. And sometimes nobody knows what the issues are until you're halfway through it and you ask, wait, what about this? Or what about this? And it's just being able to try and understand what those issues are with the lens that sometimes it's not as straightforward as looking at a rent roll and then, figuring out where to go from there.
So given that obviously when cases are ongoing, you can't speak out of turn, I would assume at this point, as long as you've been around the profession, at least a case or two that you've worked on has either settled or has gone before the arbiter and it is now public record. Is there one or two in particular you could touch on about the uniqueness of the valuation matter that you were involved in?
Yeah, I can. There's one that comes to mind. A few years ago, a light rail project was completed in San Diego, and I remember one of the properties in particular was a commercial property that was part of it was being acquired for one of the stations, one of the light rail stations. And the issue was not necessarily what the value of that property was worth, but what impact was there going to be for the parking at that property? Because that parking was not only serving this building, but it was serving 2 or 3 surrounding buildings. And so there were several questions that came up. One was, if you take this parking away, how does it impact the main building? How does it impact the 2 or 3 buildings next door? Do the 2 or 3 buildings next door even have rights to this parking area? That was a big question. And at the end of the day, when you come up with your just compensation number, how does all that get allocated? Does it all go to the main building? Does it all go to the 2 or 3 other buildings? Sometimes we complete our assignment and there are so many other questions at the back end or afterward that you have to help your client understand and answer, that it's sometimes not just putting your file away and being done with it. These things can last for a while after.
That's quite an experience from that standpoint. Did the nature of, for those that are not familiar with the type of litigation work you were involved in and continue to be involved in, going back to that specialty employment after working for a large firm, is there consistency to the work, or is it, consistency meaning it was always a particular type of case that you were typically engaged in, or, not to use the word inconsistency, but was there a great variation or diversity of the work, and it was more, again, just solving problems for clients?
Great question. And I think it depends on where you are. The firm that I worked for, the question was a value-related question, but it could vary from eminent domain to construction defect to lease dispute, ground lease, arbitration. The gamut was wide. For others, they may specialize in a particular part. I do right-of-way work at the acquisition level before the public agency makes the offer, and I'm mostly working for the public agencies. Or I mostly am related trial level, working for mostly the property owner, or I'm working for the public agency. And so I had the benefit and opportunity to do a lot of different things for a lot of different people, agencies, private clients, things like that. There are some that specialize in a particular area, and that can be fine because they get really good at what they do. They know what their clients expect, and there can be a steady flow of work because you're the go-to person for that.
It's a fascinating change of pace, I'm inferring, from going from a large national firm where there's heavy focus on lending work and institutional portfolios and quarterly reporting to litigation, as you talked about, that could go on for extended period of time. How does a day or a week or a month flow when you're not sitting there? I mean, yes, there's deadlines, and of course there's so much involved in the litigation space. I don't know we'll get into all that level of detail, but talk about that transition that you had to actually go through, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, it was certainly a transition. That's a good word. It was learning that it's okay for things to last more than a week or two or three. And it's life and daily management where you have to prioritize, all right, these things are important. I have a statutory deadline that's coming up, and therefore my work has to be done by X. It's making sure that all of our clients' needs are being met and addressed, answering questions about the work that you did, but also the work that the other side did. A lot of my work, again, has to do with forensic review and just explaining to our clients what the issues are, whether that's appraisal related, whether it's standards related, anything in between. But I would say it's just trying to keep all the balls in the air and making sure that none of them fall, which if you have an knack for that, I know some appraisers, they really need that finality with their assignment. Mm-hmm. And this type of work may not be their cup of tea because things can just take a long time and there's no end in sight. But for those that do have that ability to think long term or at least manage it, it's not a bad place to end up.
That's amazing. So because you got exposure to eminent domain at a larger firm, again, it sounds, what I'm hearing is that you had this opportunity to get deeper into, as you talked earlier, focusing on a set of skills for a longer period of time to professionally develop yourself. How did your learning and the type of cases you worked on change over the extended period of time you worked with Steve's firm?
It was always complex. I guess that's the That's the interesting and rewarding thing.
Okay.
Will things continue to get more complex? I think so. As our profession shrinks, technology gets better. It's pretty hard to get into this side of the business, as a lot of our listeners know. It's just being able to manage that complexity where the case law continues to change. So being on top of what that case law is, going to legal events, conferences, seminars of that particular specialty, that's really important. And just being at the forefront of how we do things, how things get appraised, and trying to be a voice for that, because it is not as black and white as one would think. For example, in eminent domain, if it's only the land that's being taken, there are many of our peers that only appraise the land, even if there's a building on it. And that could lead to an issue of whether or not that building is actually impacted when that land is being taken. If you don't appraise the building, how do you know that there's an impact? That's a question I come across all the time. And it can certainly be okay to not appraise everything, but the question is, does your scope of work, is your work extensive enough that it results in people believing what you did? It's interesting that our profession is built in such a way that we provide value when people actually believe what we're saying. Yeah,
I love that.
We're not like a doctor where they diagnose you and then my knee hurts. Yeah, this is the problem. It's here's our number and whether or not it's credible. But so to go back to your question, things have a certain level of complexity from the start, and it'll continue to change, and just being on top of those changes. Where if you're just starting off,
I see,
there's a lot of catching up to do, but if you put in the work and get caught up, then hopefully one day you can actually be a part of the conversation.
So did you become an attorney in the process, or you just play one of the...
I only play one on TV. No, I'm completely kidding.
And Eric, you are photogenic, so I appreciate that about you.
No law degree or anything like that from my end, although I know a few people that are both appraisers and JDs or going to law school. But it's knowing the case law, relevant case law for the area that you're working in, because it's important.
Got it.
Some valuation methodologies aren't even allowed in certain arenas. Certain types of data are not allowed in certain arenas. And so just knowing what those rules and regulations are, we have to do that anyway as part of our work. But certainly in the litigation realm, because if you don't know what you're doing, or you use the wrong definition of value, or you use the wrong approach, that can get you in trouble in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, you can tank the case pretty quick for a client when you
and then that's not even the half of it. But
no. Then you have professional liability as well. All kinds of fun stuff. So what, you have continued to have a big impact in the industry, but also you've taken some steps on your own. Where are you at now, and what are you doing?
I have hung my own shingle as of 2024. I saw an opportunity where, at least in my market, our clients are looking for the next generation of experts, because there are certainly qualified people that have been doing this for a long time, but until something changes, we can't do everything forever. And so I was getting those opportunities and still get those opportunities. And I thought, well, it's time for me to at least see if I can do this on my own. And so I've been launching Schneider Valuation Consultants, doing work statewide, expanding into the region, and looking forward to continuing to do that. It's just, what are my skills, and how can I use them to help my clients with what they need?
So at this point, given all that you've been exposed to, and this big step that you took, what would you say your skills are as a next generation of expert?
In our profession, you learn what you know. And by that, I mean, you've been appraising hotels for banks for a long time. Unless you're taking that effort to learn new skills, you're going to be good at what you do, but you may have a hard time learning how to do something else. And I have continued to learn about litigation, appraising, not only going to all the conferences and speaking at them and writing articles and things like that, but just talking to the people that know what they're doing, and not just appraisers. It seems like, we wear our valuation hat, but we also have to know the legal side of it. We have to have an understanding of how to read right-of-way plans, knowing who to talk to when there's environmental issues going on. Just have a wide skill set that's not just the appraisal training. That's kind of the interesting thing. You just have to take that effort to just know a little bit more than the next person, because that's what our clients are looking for. I'm not saying that the appraisal education is not important. It certainly is, but just going a little bit deeper and understanding the methodology from an appraisal perspective, but also understanding how appraisal fits into the greater scheme of things. Because, for example, in right-of-way, it's not just our number that plays a part in the acquisition. It's an actual project being built and how that impacts people and their operations in real life. And we're just a piece of that.
Yes. No, that is fascinating. So you mentioned that you're maybe this is something that people have considered either previously or they might consider in the future. What was it for you that had you decide to take the step that you took? Because a lot of people are not interested in that, or they're not really sure, or they don't even know what questions to ask. What was that process like for you, Eric?
Great question. I think that at the foundation, you probably have to have an entrepreneurial spirit to want to go and try something on your own, or just go off, try to level up in general. I know plenty of appraisers who are happy working for someone else. I know a lot of appraisers that don't want to testify or do litigation at all. Not interesting.
Oh my God.
Not of interest to them.
That's like getting thrown in the lion's den. I mean, come on, that's like biblical in nature. I mean, come on.
And so just having a certain understanding of who you are and what you want to do, and also what you're willing to do to get there. We were at a good point in our life, and by we I mean my family and I, where we decided, this is something that I want to try, and with the skill set that I have, I could go a bunch of different places. I'm really good at holding briefcases, Michael. I can hold them like the best of them.
Eric, what is a briefcase? Is that a new feature on TikTok?
Yeah, and it holds your typewriter, believe it or not. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love it.
And so again, it was talking to our existing clients, understanding that there was a need, and there continues to be a need. It's not just in my neck of the woods. Across the country, people are looking for that next generation of talent. And the question is, all right, how can I assist with the skills that I have, or what skills do I need to go and get? What things do I need to learn? It's asking those questions, trying to find out the answer, and then taking action on that. Because we can sit around and pontificate all day long, but that doesn't help anybody. It's the doing part that matters.
That's phenomenal. So, Eric, given all that you've seen and all that you've experienced and all that you consider, as a more newly minted single shingle, or I think is how you referred to it, what are you optimistic about or looking forward to over the next 3 to 5 years? for yourself and maybe also for the industry?
I'm telling people that timeline is going to be really important, that 3 to 5 year timeline, because I don't know how it is in your market, Michael, but the talent and the experts that are here continue to decline. Yeah. Every day someone's saying, hey, I don't want to do any testifying work anymore. You can give me those other opportunities, but I just don't want to be deposed anymore. In 5 years, that number is going to increase. You know, a lot of our listeners know, or maybe they don't, but the average MAI is well along in age. I don't know what it is these days, but 65, maybe 66. As time goes on, that number will go up. And
it is.
As we've probably talked about, or as you probably talked about in other episodes, there's just not a lot of people coming up through our ranks. And this next window of time is going to be really important for appraisers to get the skills that they need to get to be an asset to the clientele that exists out there, because there will always be a need for an appraisal expert in our world. Maybe the eminent domain landscape can change over time. Maybe, there won't be as many environmental impacts, but it could also go the other direction, where places like California continue to be on fire, and there might be stimulus packages that result in more projects being built around the country. So I'm optimistic for our profession to grow and learn those skills and be able to help our clients.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As you reflect on your experience, for those that maybe are not fortunate enough, we have a fascinating segmentation of listeners, of the thousands and thousands of them. There's a subset that, like you and I and others, been around the profession for a long period of time, have letters after their names, they've made that investment. There's a lot of people who are in the profession and just good contributors in whatever role they may be in, maybe kind of a generalist or a specialist. And they have a lot of people that either are new or might be considering the profession as a mid-career change. What would be the steps you would take if you were doing it over again, given all that you've experienced, as guidance for some of our peers, so that they too could maybe reach the promised land that you are currently cultivating?
I say this a lot, and we've talked about this. I liken our profession to being a blacksmith, where you can read books about it, but you have to go and do it. And what better way to do it than to learn from somebody who's done it? Mm-hmm. And the most important advice I could give is to go out and talk to people. And it can be hard. Our profession can do a much better job just letting the world know that we exist. And it's more than just appraising a house for a bank loan. It's our profession can be a lot more than that. Not that the residential lending space isn't important. It certainly is, but there's just differences in the work that we do. So talking to those people and asking them what they do in their day, what are the things that they like doing, what they don't like doing. And in my experience, appraisers are very encouraging and want to give their time to answer those questions. I certainly do. Mm-hmm. And I try to pay back everything that was paid to me. And there's opportunities to talk to those people at the Appraisal Institute, if there's meetings for that. International Right-of-Way Association, like I mentioned, is another group that's specific to the right-of-way industry, and it's not just real estate appraisers, it's attorneys and engineers and agency folks. Sure. Finding out where those meetings are, finding people online, having informational interviews, and just learning and just figuring out, all right, what's good for me and what are my skills and how can I help that person if you're looking to get into a career in this side of the world.
That's fantastic. Well, Eric, I, again, much appreciate all that you've shared, so much wisdom, compressed in such a short period of time. And, the opportunity for peers to compress decades into days, even into an hour, for what's possible for them because of your thoughtfulness and generosity and sharing. I just, again, want to say thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here, Michael.
Man, you're welcome. Man, we're so welcome for that. Friends, as I mentioned, an act of generosity right now is maybe an action you could take is consider investing in yourself for your own professional development. But there might be someone else you're like, man, I need to share this. I know this good friend, or I maybe know somebody else in the industry, or I just met this individual at an event I went to in the last month. It is actually good to get out and meet people in person. But that being the case, your sharing makes a difference here. And from what started out as an idea to just in a short period of time is impacting thousands and thousands of people across the profession and beyond this profession is all because of you. And we really appreciate that. So this is just another extension of that generosity and contribution. So Eric, again, thank you so much on behalf of Parusings.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Parusings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Parusings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.